Hey guys, tonight we're slipping on a pair of buckled shoes, sidestepping a chamber pot in a Versailles hallway, and tiptoeing into the marble-clad chaos of a 17th-century royal kitchen. You might be expecting ladles, game birds, and piles of bread, but tonight your focus is a square of white linen. Not just any square, of course. This one's been folded, creased, curled, coaxed into the shape of a blooming artichoke. And it's resting gently atop a gold-rimmed plate as if it's the star of the meal. Yes, we're talking about napkins. Napkin folding. Napkin folding in France. During a time when a botched pleat might get you demoted to chamber pot duty. You probably won't survive this, at least not as a 17th-century servant with shaky thumbs and an uneven swan fold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. Drop that in the comments if you're awake enough. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in the scullery, tucked beneath the sprawling floors of Versailles. The air smells like hot tallow, beeswax polish, and damp limestone. It's a maze of bustling bodies, scullions hauling firewood, footmen chasing wayward ducks, and amid it all, a lean young man crouches near a wooden bench, carefully creasing a napkin into what vaguely resembles a fleur-de-lis. He isn't here to serve soup or chase poultry. He's here to fold. Napkin folding, in this palace, is no trifling matter. While the king dines above, his guests expect more than just an exquisite meal, they demand a stage play in linen. Historians still argue whether it began as a practical art or a flamboyant show of household discipline, but by the mid-1600s, elaborate napkin sculptures had become the unofficial opening act of royal banquets. One wrong crease, and the entire performance looked amateur. Imagine the pressure. You, trembling slightly, are handed a fresh rectangle of finely woven linen, bleached snow-white, starched to a crackling crisp. Your fingers are cold, your folding table has a dent in the middle, and you're supposed to turn this humble cloth into a two-headed eagle grasping a sheaf of wheat. Which sounds more like a hallucination than an achievable origami goal. But this was the reality. According to a surviving inventory from a 1672 banquet, the table featured no fewer than 48 unique napkin arrangements, one for each guest, none repeated, all different creatures, towers, or floral shapes. Each piece had to be freestanding, symmetrically creased, and positioned precisely so the head of a linen rabbit, for instance, faced the correct diner. Napkins at Versailles weren't just decorations. They were announcements. A folded unicorn? That meant your host considered you especially important. A flattened lotus? Perhaps a subtle jab. Some shapes were code for passivity, indulgence, or lack of influence. Whether guests understood these signals is another matter, but the staff certainly did. The job of napkin folding fell mostly to young kitchen apprentices and linen boys, many of whom were selected not just for their tidiness or obedience, but their fingers. Long, dexterous fingers were prized. Folders were trained like musicians, practicing hours each week on mock linens, perfecting the reverse pinch, the bridal twist, and the chopwood fan with split corners. And yes, those were real terms. Historians still argue whether these folding styles came from guild traditions or were invented on the spot by innovative palace staff. Some claim there was a secret handbook, passed between the most elite napkin artists, bound in leather and sealed with wax. Others scoff, it was all just improvisation, they say, whispered techniques handed from one sleepy apprentice to another over endless nighttime folding sessions. Tonight, you follow the story of one such apprentice, let's call him Etienne. He's 15, recently promoted from dish boy to assistant folder, and today, he's been given a challenge: create a sea creature, any sea creature, to honor the Admiral of France visiting from Marseille. Etienne has never even seen the sea, but he's heard tales. He thinks of fins, curling tails, salt spray. He folds and refolds, sighs, unfolds again. Finally, he settles on what he hopes resembles a marine serpent, though it's really just a swan with the neck twisted backward. No one corrects him. The Admiral laughs delightedly and pats Etienne on the head. It's a win. From moments like this, napkin folders earned prestige, minor, sure, but meaningful. Some even gained names whispered with affection in the servant halls: Maurice the master fan, Claudette of the four-fold tulip, Jean with the crooked swan. Were they respected? Mildly. Feared? Not quite. Envied? Only when their fold survived the entire meal without collapsing into soup. There are records from a German visitor, circa 1685, who described the French dinner table as a gallery of linen beasts and towers more elaborate than the conversation. It wasn't far from the truth. The art of folding became theatre, silent, stiff, scented faintly of starch. And you, wandering through this kitchen tonight, start to realize the napkin isn't just a tool to dab grease. It's a canvas. A message. A miniature architectural feat or, depending on the evening, a very expensive way to make a duck out of cloth. You're still in the kitchen, same walls, same bustle, but your eyes are drawn upward now, toward the grand dining chambers above. There, where light from gilded chandeliers bathes velvet drapes and gold-inlaid wall panels, the napkin ascends beyond mere function. Here, it's a status symbol. A whispered symbol of wealth and refinement, folded quietly beside crystal goblets and porcelain soup bowls. It's easy to forget in your modern world, where napkins are mostly paper and often end up scrunched in laps or dropped beneath tables, but in 17th century France, the dining table was a stage, and every prop on it signaled who you were, how much you mattered, and what others should think of you. Especially the napkin. Originally, these cloths were coarse rectangles tucked into belts or thrown over shoulders. Their sole purpose? Wipe off grease, wine, and embarrassment. But by the time you arrive in Louis XIV's glittering court, napkins are made from the finest Flemish linen, hand-loomed, embroidered at the corners with family crests or elaborate monograms. They are no longer napkins. They are declarations. Your napkin tells people what kind of bread you deserve. Consider this: the king's personal table linens were changed 3 times per meal. Not washed, replaced. Fresh folds for the fish course, newer ones for the meat, and again for the dessert. That's not convenience. That's drama. Some say it was done to ensure cleanliness, others whisper it was all performance, to remind guests just how disposable luxury could be when you were chosen by God to rule. Historians still debate whether these mid-meal changes were a universal court custom or just an eccentric affectation of Versailles, but the servants knew one thing for certain: fold fast, fold flawlessly, and keep extras ready. Always. Let's zoom in on one particular evening. The Marquis de Rambouillet is seated at the king's left hand. His napkin has been folded into a twin-headed griffin, symbol of power, authority, and, ironically, indigestion. Everyone notices. Across the table, the Comte de Saint-Aignan is given a more humble lily design. It's dainty, almost shy. A jab, perhaps? Or maybe the folder just ran out of starch. Either way, the Comte is not pleased. These silent snubs, real or imagined, could stir gossip that lasted weeks. You picture it: nobles whispering in corners, fans fluttering in indignation, chambermaids smuggling rumors between salons. You, meanwhile, are still seated quietly in the corner, watching how the shape of a napkin, a twist here, a curl there, transforms a piece of cloth into a political statement. Not everyone took the art so seriously. The king, it said, was amused by more whimsical folds, animals, musical instruments, occasionally even miniature thrones. Louis XIV was known to encourage variety, perhaps to stave off dinner party dullness. Or perhaps because he delighted in the subtle hierarchy that linen artistry imposed: who got the lion, who got the goose, who got the dreaded blank square with no design at all. And let's talk about that. A blank napkin, folded simply in a rectangle, was not merely a sign of minimalist taste. It was an insult. The equivalent of being served broth in a chip bowl or being seated next to the least favored aunt. If you received a simple fold, the message was clear: you are not important enough to warrant flourishes. Even more damning? The misfold. Imagine a beautiful bird shape, but the head droops. Or a tulip, but the petals are lopsided. These accidents weren't just awkward, they were read as signs of disrespect or even subtle resistance among the staff. Sometimes, such folds were intentional. Rumor tells of a royal chef's apprentice who, angry at a visiting duke's cruel words to the kitchen staff, folded his napkin into an upturned pig, a shape technically brilliant, but socially devastating. The duke never knew. But every servant at the table did. And they laughed about it for years. Folding was often done behind the scenes, of course, in linen rooms lined with oak cabinets and thick cedar chests. But sometimes, especially at private dinners, folders were summoned to set the napkin on the plate personally, creating a kind of performance art. You can see the scene in your mind's eye: a slim young man in livery, eyes downcast, walking with great ceremony toward a dining guest, linen swan perched like a crown on his silver tray. He places it carefully, bows, and retreats. No applause, just a faint hum of admiration, and maybe a raised eyebrow from a rival guest. By now, you're starting to understand the weight of it all. Not just the literal weight, some folds required so much starch they stood stiff as porcelain, but the social weight. Napkins could uplift you or humiliate you. They could speak without sound. They could praise, diminish, joke, or charm. Even among servants, a hierarchy developed. The ones who folded for the king were considered elite. Those who handled linens for minor nobles, fine, but not especially glamorous. And if you were stuck folding for guests with no titles at all? Best not mention it in the servants' quarters. You picture Etienne again, our quiet folding apprentice from earlier, now older, now respected, perhaps even entrusted with the king's dessert napkin. He doesn't speak as he works. His hands know the rhythm. Fold, press, fold, twist, breathe. There's a kind of grace in the repetition. You imagine it like yoga, but with more linen and fewer downward dogs. It's ironic, isn't it? That something so simple, a square of cloth, could rise to such heights of symbolism, whispering into the stiff, perfumed air of Versailles things too risky to say aloud. And still, you haven't even made it to the banquet. You're just getting started. You're on the move now, up the marble staircases, past embroidered tapestries depicting triumphs of war and deer hunts you're pretty sure never actually happened. You step into the grand dining hall. The air is thick with clove-scented candles and the slow creak of chairs being drawn back from tables wider than your kitchen at home. You've arrived just before the meal begins, and what you see isn't food. It's a menagerie of cloth. Napkins, dozens of them, perched proudly on polished silver chargers. Each one a different shape. That one over there looks like a phoenix caught mid-rise. The one by the Duchess resembles a sailing ship, sails puffed out by some trick of starch and symmetry. And next to the king himself? A napkin pyramid, tiered and ornate, perhaps a wink to Egyptian influence, perhaps just a show of linen muscle. This is not dining. This is sculpture. Tonight's royal banquet is in honor of a visiting ambassador from Spain, and no expense has been spared. The folding theme? Maritime diplomacy. That means ships, seagulls, anchors, and dolphins, and not a single crease out of place. You sidle closer. No one notices you, you're part of the linen now. You count the folds on one dolphin. 18. How did they get the curve of the fin to stand upright like that? Magic? Wire? No, you spot it, hidden stitching. A secret loop to anchor the shape. Clever. Historians still debate how far these designs pushed the limits of napkin engineering. Some claim the more complicated folds required hidden internal structures, tiny rods, even wax stiffeners. Others insist it was all starch, patience, and years of disciplined fingerwork. And the guests? They react the way you'd expect the aristocracy to react to linen animals. Politely amused. Mild clapping. One marquis tilts his head, trying to guess whether the napkin before him is a squid or just a sad spiral. Ah, he exclaims, delighted. It's a Portuguese jellyfish. It's not. But no one corrects him. There's an odd rule about these napkin creations: you don't unfold them. At least not until the first course is served. Etiquette demands you admire the sculpture. Comment on it, even. Maybe compare it to the one your cousin received at the Duchess of Orleans' last supper party. But you do not unfold early. Unfolding too soon was a quiet scandal. It meant you were impatient. It meant you lacked refinement. It was the 17th century equivalent of slurping soup or double-dipping your bread in the communal butter. So you wait. The room waits. And when the trumpets sound, yes, there are trumpets, and the first course is announced, there's a collective breath, then a wave of rustling cloth as noble hands gently dismantle a sea of linen beasts. Dolphins become rectangles. Ships become humble squares. The magic is over. For now. Behind the scenes, napkin artists have already started folding the next round. Royal banquets could last for hours. Not because the food took long, though it did, but because of the pacing. Between courses came music, poetry recitations, the occasional juggler, who was definitely paid in bread, not respect, and always, new napkins. Imagine it, you've just finished your third course, pheasant stuffed with dates, and suddenly, a servant slides a new napkin before you, folded into a windmill with turning blades. You can't eat that. You stare at that. And that was the point. Napkins gave the eye something to do while the stomach recovered. Some banquets took themes to extremes. A masquerade held in 1667 featured a zodiacal napkin theme, one for each sign, folded with absurd specificity. You can picture the Libra, a perfect pair of balanced scales made of cloth. The Leo? A lion, if you squinted kindly. And Pisces? Twin fish curled around each other, which unfortunately looked like two snails kissing. Still, the nobles were charmed. At another meal, the theme was ye mythical creatures of Europe. There was a griffin, classic, a basilisk, hard to tell if it was a bird or a worm, and a mermaid folded so elaborately that it had linen hair braided from fringe. It was removed before dessert, however, after it toppled into a guest's lap and scandalously resembled a different sort of shape. You chuckle, even now, thinking how much time and effort went into these things, knowing most of them collapsed the moment warm soup arrived. That's part of the beauty. Napkin folding was ephemeral. Like fireworks. Or soufflés. Or your motivation to exercise. It existed for a moment, astonished quietly, and then was gone. The best folders accepted this. They didn't mourn the destruction of their work. They leaned into it. Each new fold was a fresh canvas. The goal wasn't permanence. It was perfection in the moment. You notice one servant tonight, an older woman with silver-threaded hair and soft, precise hands. She places a folded lotus in front of a guest, bows, and turns away without looking back. She doesn't need to look. She knows it's flawless. And so the banquet continues, course after course, fold after fold, nobles pretending they don't care, but very much noticing if their napkin is more complex than their neighbors. You stay quiet, letting the linen whisper its subtle secrets across the candlelit table. And in this gentle, glowing hall of flourishes and folded cloth, you feel something soft settle in the air, like a breath held just long enough. You slip away from the banquet, not because it's dull, though your ankles are sore from standing, but because you want to see where these marvelous napkin creatures are born. So you descend again, into a side corridor off the main kitchens. It's quieter here. You hear the muffled hum of conversation, the snap of starched linen, and someone humming a lullaby that's been repurposed for folding rhythm. You step into a long, warm chamber lit by oil lamps and the faint glow of moonlight through narrow windows. This is the salle de pliage, the folding room. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax, hot irons, and pressed linen. A dozen or so young apprentices sit at wooden tables, each focused, each cradling a square of fabric like it's a living creature. This is where napkin folders are trained. You think of modern apprenticeships, perhaps someone learning to brew coffee or assemble a phone, and then you look here, a 12-year-old girl carefully coaxing a napkin into a three-tiered pagoda with turrets. You watch as her master, a wiry woman named Therese, nods once with approval, then flicks a corner of the pagoda with her finger. The top collapses. Again, she says softly. And starch this time, child. The training is rigorous. Some say obsessive. Napkin folding in 17th century France wasn't just a party trick, it was a trade. A discipline. Some folding houses required years of apprenticeship before a young servant was allowed to fold even the simplest rosebud designed for a seated guest. It started small. Folding rectangles. Creasing edges. Learning the way cloth responded to moisture, to heat, to time. Then came the shapes, fans, cones, spirals. After that, the beasts. And if you were truly gifted, the abstract forms, exploding suns, illusion knots, towers with hidden interior folds that could only be achieved through a 12-step crease and flip method known ominously as le tour du diable. The devil's twist. Historians still debate whether le tour du diable was real or simply a mythical fold used to haze new apprentices. Some say only 3 people ever mastered it. Others believe it was designed purely to show off in front of nobles who wouldn't know a reverse pleat from a laundry mistake. Training wasn't all technique, it was rhythm, timing, even posture. You see one boy with a leather belt tied around his shoulders to keep them straight while folding. Another practices with cloths the size of blankets just to build arm strength. If you can fold an elephant, Therese murmurs, you can fold a goose. You wonder if that's wisdom or nonsense. It's probably both. But it isn't all punishment. The older apprentices laugh softly between tasks. They pass folded notes, literally, tiny messages shaped like leaves or stars. One girl giggles at a napkin resembling her tutor's wig. A folded revenge. And always, the folding. Over and over. Like breathing. You begin to notice how serene it is. Calming, even. Each fold quiets the room. Each crease, a small meditation. You feel your shoulders relax just watching them. There were competitions too, though informal. On rest days, folding duels were held. 2 apprentices would sit back to back, each with a fresh linen square, and race to produce a specified shape, say, a Napoleon's hat or the coveted the double swan. The loser had to iron everyone's cloths the next morning. The winner? Bragging rights and perhaps a nod from the maître plieur. Yes, the maître plieur, the folding master. Every kitchen had one. Think of them as the head barista, the editor-in-chief, the quiet wizard behind the tablecloth curtain. They had the final say on designs, the most secret folding techniques, and often, the responsibility of inventing new shapes for special occasions. A baby born in court? That night's napkins might be folded into tiny cradles. A military victory? Triumphant eagles or cannons? A scandal? Well, let's just say that more than one noble was greeted with a napkin discreetly shaped like a donkey. One such maître, a stern man named Florent, was said to have created a fold so complex it took for napkins sewn together and could only be displayed on feast days when the guests were seated precisely 32 inches from the table's edge, any closer, and the piece would poke someone in the eye. Florent was legendary for another reason. According to court rumor, he once taught a blindfolded servant to fold a passable serpent of the Nile using only voice instructions and one hand. Historians are skeptical. Most think it was just exaggerated kitchen gossip. But in this softly lit folding room, you want to believe it. And here's something truly curious, not all the servants who learned napkin folding stayed in kitchens. Some became decorators. Others became dressmakers, the skills translating neatly from fabric on a table to fabric on a person. The way a hem flows. The way a bodice pleats. All of it starts with understanding folds. So napkin folding, in its own strange way, offered a quiet ladder of opportunity. A way up. A way out. A means of rising, one crease at a time. You look again at the girl folding the pagoda. She's got it now. Each tier stands straight. The turrets hold. Therese doesn't flick it this time. She just nods and moves on. And you? You sit in the corner, eyelids heavy, listening to the hypnotic rhythm of cloth being creased, 1 fold, 2 folds, turn, repeat. It's like listening to a lullaby made of linen. You stay a while in the folding room, long enough for the oil lamps to burn lower, for the chatter to fade into that dreamy quiet where hands move almost on their own. But eventually, your curiosity gets the better of you. You want to see how they do it, really do it. Not just the graceful hands or the final sculpture, but the tools behind the art. What secret objects hide behind these impossibly clean lines and precise creases? So you sneak into the adjoining storage room, where the walls are lined with narrow drawers, hooks, and narrow cubbies filled with what look, at first, like plain household items. But look closer, these are the sacred instruments of the napkin folder's craft. First, you see starch. Mountains of it. Not the kind you buy in a bottle from a store, but a flaky white substance stored in barrels like flour. Derived from potatoes, rice, even chestnuts, depending on what part of France you're in. And the application? Not a random spritz. There were brushes, flat and bristled like pastry tools, used to apply the right amount of stiffness to the exact fold location. Too much, and your swan crackles like a dead leaf. Too little, and the wings droop mid-dinner. Beside the brushes are irons, but not just one kind. There's the broad-faced iron for general shaping, the corner pinch iron with a V-shaped mouth, and your favorite, the spiral iron, used to set rounded edges for flower folds and curly tails. All of them are heated over coals and handled with cloth-wrapped grips. One misstep, and you scorch the linen. A burnt fold wasn't just ugly. It was dangerous. You could lose your folding privileges, or worse, be reassigned to rat patrol. Then come the templates, thin wooden cutouts used for consistency in large banquet orders. One is shaped like a harp, another like a goblet. There's even a multi-armed frame labeled Hydra, 7-head, which you're really hoping was used metaphorically. But the most intriguing tool of all is a plain leather pouch. Inside, folded into a perfect cube, is a folding diagram book. The pages are soft with use, some corners dog-eared, others stained with starch. You flip through it carefully. Each design has a name: Fleur du Roi, Arch of St. Denis, Swaddled Cherub. The instructions? Arrows, dotted lines, and small French notes like tournez avec grâce, turn with grace, or ne jamais plier à sec, never fold dry. You pause at one page with a deep crease, titled Le Miroir Double. The illustration shows a folded napkin shaped like two opposing swans, their necks forming a heart. Romantic, no? The caption below reads simply, used during engagements, or when requesting forgiveness at court. You wonder how many relationships were mended, or ruined, over one misplaced fold. Some folders had their own kits, tools custom-made or passed down. Wooden folders with names etched into the side, their surfaces polished by decades of linen pressure. You imagine Etienne, now grown and experienced, running his fingers over a tool once given to him by his own mentor. There's something soothing about that. A craft that transcends generations, whispering from crease to crease. And here's a fun bit, napkin folders even had their own superstitions. You spot a small blue thread tied around one brush, meant to ward off bad folding days. Another iron has a scrap of lavender pinned beneath its handle, for calm hands. One drawer is entirely devoted to scraps of failed napkins, none thrown away. Bad luck, the note reads. Let them rest until they forget. Historians still argue whether these quirks were widespread or just charming oddities of Versailles, but you can't help smiling. When a task is this precise, this quiet, this close to artistry, it's natural to start seeing meaning in every crease. Folding had timing, too. Some folds were best done in early morning, when linen was still cool and damp from washing. Others demanded nighttime conditions, when the starch had settled and irons could be managed more slowly. There were wet folds, which held best when cloth was half-dried, and blind folds, which were folded inside out, only revealing their final form after an intricate inversion like a magician flipping a scarf into a dove. The apprentices had their own terminology. A fold that collapsed? A sleeper? A shape that couldn't be interpreted by any guest? A riddle? A napkin that refused to take form, no matter how hard you tried? A ghost? And yet, they kept folding. Some tools here are surprisingly modern. A small pair of tweezers sits beside a leather-bound thimble. Used, apparently, to tuck tiny corners or retrieve folds from tight creases without disrupting the rest of the shape. Precision mattered. You're starting to see how even a 10-minute napkin design could require an hour of preparation. The folding was only the final act. And then you notice something odd. Tucked in the back of one drawer, a metal rod. Slender, with a curved end. It looks like something from a surgery kit. Curious, you lift it. A tag reads, "For internal arches." You blink. Are we building bridges out of napkins? Apparently yes. Some napkin sculptures were so large they required supports, hidden rods, loops of wire, or soft stuffing tucked invisibly beneath folds to create volume. The illusion was that the entire thing held itself up, but in reality? It was theater. Smart, gentle deception. Cloth architecture. So you set the rod back down. Let the tools rest. The folding room is quiet now. The fire in the corner flickers low, casting long shadows across the organized chaos. You take a slow breath, feeling the rhythm of it all sink in: brush, starch, iron, crease, and the quiet pride of making something beautiful for someone else to destroy without ever knowing your name. And somehow, that feels peaceful. You wake the next morning, or what passes for morning in this gently lit dream, and the folding room is already humming again. But something's different now. There's a hush, a tension. Today isn't just another banquet. Today, messages will be folded. Yes, tonight's dinner is more than a meal. It's a quiet contest, a whispered drama played out on porcelain plates and inside neatly creased napkins. Welcome to the world of secret codes in folds. You trail a young apprentice named Cecile as she hurries through the corridor with a stack of folded linens. She doesn't speak much, but her face is flushed with purpose. She's delivering napkins for a private supper attended by the king's inner circle, diplomats, ministers, and 2 rivals who have not shared a meal in 6 months. The design theme? Garden of Peace. But here's the twist: each napkin will contain more than just artistry. They'll contain meaning. See, napkins weren't always just art or utility. They could also speak. Not in actual words, of course, but in shape, orientation, and even how they were placed. Folded lily pointing left? A warning. Folded fan turned upside down? A message of sympathy. An open fold swan with wings curled inward? Disapproval. These weren't official codes, not published or taught in books, but passed along through whispers in linen closets and sideways glances during service. Historians still debate whether such symbolism was truly consistent or just retrofitted by gossip-hungry servants, but records do survive of recurring fold pairings and the associations they developed. Some were simple: a folded rose meant favor. Others were elaborate, like the notorious mirror fold, where 2 napkins faced each other across the table, a silent cue that those seated beside them were in alliance. Tonight, the stakes are high. A delicate negotiation is underway about the control of trade routes through the Pyrenees. Each fold has been carefully selected not only for beauty but implication. One napkin, shaped like a clasped hand, will be placed before the Spanish ambassador. Another, a simple folded scroll, lies before the Minister of Finance. The rest? Subtler. Shapes hinting at olive branches, distant castles, even blooming fig trees, symbols of patience, prosperity, and, if the folds hold, peace. Cecile watches nervously as the metroplier inspects each piece. His eyes scan them like a general reviewing a line of soldiers. He pauses at one, the scroll. Frowns. Refolds it entirely, this time adding a twist at the end. It now resembles a rolled treaty. A stronger message. You watch this all in awe. Not a word is spoken. Yet a silent narrative is being written in creases and curves. This was the power of napkin folding at its peak. It could delight, insult, woo, or warn, all under the cover of courtly manners. There were rumors, too, of spies among the folders. Linen boys who pass secrets hidden in folds, notes stitched inside the hem, or symbols arranged like letters. During the War of Devolution, one story tells of a folded sunburst placed before a noble suspected of treason. It was meant to signal that his betrayal had been seen. Whether the story is true, or just a juicy yarn passed around the laundry vats, no one knows. Still, the possibility lingers. Tonight, you watch the guests enter, one by one. Their eyes fall on the napkins before them. Some nod. Some squint. One man adjusts his chair to change his angle, as if trying to decode a shape more clearly. A folded dove? Or is it a hawk? And here's the best part, nothing is ever confirmed. No one ever asks, what does my napkin mean? That would spoil the game. The folds are deniable. Ambiguous. Just linen, after all. But everyone looks. Everyone guesses. Everyone talks afterward. Later, in the servants' wing, the kitchen gossips are already abuzz. Did you see the ambassador's smile? That folded scroll? I think it was hollow, there had to be a note. No, that wasn't a fig tree, it was clearly a truce torch. And so it spreads, this linen language. Never officially taught. Never openly discussed. But real, nonetheless. Real in the way that traditions born from repetition and intent become something more. You find it beautiful. This quiet, coded world. No ink. No speeches. Just the curl of a napkin petal, the arch of a folded wing. As the dinner concludes and the folds are once again unraveled by greasy fingers and idle guests, you glance at one last design before it's whisked away, a coiled snake, resting atop a dessert plate. Not threatening, just sleeping. Someone, somewhere, wanted to be understood. And in this small, soft way, they were. You leave behind the grandeur of Versailles for a moment, well, not literally, but narratively. Your feet take you down the muddy streets of Lyon, through the creaking wagons of Rouen, and finally into the modest but bustling parlors of the merchant class. Here, napkins are folded too, but not for kings. Tonight, you explore how napkin culture trickled into the bourgeoisie, the rising merchant class of 17th century France. The rich but not noble. The respectable, the slightly anxious, the people who had just enough coin to buy embroidered linens, but not enough to buy actual status. In these homes, the table was still a theatre, but smaller. Think fewer chandeliers, more oil lamps. Less swan, more fan. Less phoenix, more cone. Still, the desire to impress guests remained. And where there's social insecurity, there's room for the napkin to shine. You step into the home of Monsieur Brisson, a prosperous cloth merchant. His parlor smells faintly of roasted goose and overcooked cabbage. Tonight, he's hosting a Sunday dinner for 2 visiting clients. His wife, Madame Brisson, has just finished setting the table. You count the forks, mismatched but polished. The plates, slightly chipped but arranged with care. And then, the napkins, folded pyramids, leaning gently to one side. Not revolutionary. But proud. She learned the fold from her neighbor's niece, who once worked in a manor kitchen. That's how the knowledge spread, not through books, but through people. Servants who left the court and brought skills home. Apprentices who taught younger cousins. Sometimes even pamphlets appeared, cheaply printed diagrams with names like napkin folds to dignify your Sunday roast. One such fold, the modest lily, became wildly popular among provincial families. It only took 4 steps, required no starch, and was sturdy enough to survive the meal, perfect for noisy children or tipsy uncles. Historians still argue whether this was a simplification of the royal lily fold or a creation all its own. Either way, it became the folding equivalent of a little black dress, timeless, flattering, always safe. Of course, some bourgeois hosts tried to be fancy. You spot one such attempt on a sideboard, a napkin shaped vaguely like a harp but sagging under the weight of its own ambition. Folded by Monsieur Brisson himself, who insists he saw it at a governor's ball once. His wife rolls her eyes but leaves it. It's charming, in a crooked sort of way. These homes had fewer tools, too. No spiral irons or internal rods. Instead, they relied on soup spoons, book edges, or even rolling pins to press folds. Some used warm stones wrapped in cloth. Creativity made up for a lack of silver. And the messages? Simpler. A folded heart for a visiting cousin with romantic prospects. A clover to wish good fortune in a business venture. A single upright triangle as a sign of peace after a family quarrel. These weren't codes so much as signals or a way of saying, I see you, I welcome you, I tried. Sometimes napkin folding became a quiet competition among neighbors. Madame Brisson hosts a dinner, shows off her folded fleur-de-lis, and the next week, Madame Durand next door has rabbits on every plate. The week after that? Swans. They use real starch, whispers Madame Brisson, enviously. Probably borrowed from her cousin who works in Montauban. And yet, for all the silent one-upmanship, there's warmth in it. The folds are a gesture of care. Of hospitality. The effort says, you matter. Sit, eat, and here's a little linen bird to prove it. One afternoon, you watch a group of neighborhood children play with discarded napkins in the garden, trying to recreate folds they saw at Sunday dinner. One boy, too young to fold properly, just rolls the cloth into a tight spiral and calls it a caterpillar. His sister claps, declares it brilliant, and suddenly everyone's folding caterpillars. And just like that, the culture lives on. Not every town followed suit, of course. In some rural villages, napkins were strictly practical. No folding. No fans. Just a square, slapped on a lap, and used to wipe gravy. But in the growing cities, where rising middle classes dreamed of velvet and Versailles, the napkin became a bridge, a small piece of imagined nobility that anyone could place beside a plate. The Brissons weren't unique. Across France, merchants, scribes, tax collectors, and apothecaries all started folding. Their styles varied. Some liked rectangular rolls that could hold a single flower. Others folded small linen pockets to tuck in prayer cards or after-dinner mints. One provincial mayor in Dijon allegedly insisted on folded towers at all city banquets, a tradition that lasted until 1709 when one such tower caught fire from a nearby candelabra. Napkin culture even began showing up in marriage contracts. Dowries that included 12 embroidered napkins suitable for formal folds. A sign not just of wealth, but refinement. Imagine, you're not just marrying into comfort, you're marrying into presentation. And in this way, the folds crept outward. From royal halls to merchant tables. From courtly gestures to neighborhood pride. From golden plates to ceramic ones. Napkins, with their soft rustle and humble duty, became social glue, holding together expectations, aspirations, and above all, community. You lean back now, in Madame Brisson's chair, listening to the gentle scrape of spoons against porcelain and the low murmur of polite conversation. A folded lily sits nearby, half unraveled, soaking up a bit of gravy. Still dignified. Still trying. You're back on the road now, this time heading over the Alps, not on foot, thankfully, but drifting lazily across the border on a breeze of curiosity and the faint scent of rosemary. You're heading into enemy territory. Or rather, rival territory. Because tonight, you're witnessing the strange, quietly passionate phenomenon of the fold wars, France versus Italy. You might think, in a world full of battles, borders, and empires, that fighting over the shape of a dinner napkin seems a bit ridiculous. And you'd be right. But also, you'd be wrong. Because in the courts of 17th century Europe, presentation was politics. And when it came to napkins, the Italians had their own long-standing traditions. Ones the French admired, envied, copied, and occasionally tried to one-up with just slightly more flair. It started subtly. Italian banquets, especially in Venice and Florence, had been folding napkins into decorative forms since at least the late 1500s. But their style was different, less architectural, more sculptural. More flowing fabric than rigid geometry. If French folds were about symmetry and symbolism, Italian folds were about movement and emotion. A swan in Versailles might stand stiff and proud, a swan in Venice seemed to be landing. French court officials, always hungry for distinction, began referring to Italian folds as too theatrical. The Italians, meanwhile, sniffed at French designs as stiff as boiled cod. And thus, the linen rivalry blossomed. You find yourself at a banquet in Turin, hosted by a well-dressed duke whose dinner table features an entire garden scene, in napkin form. Tiny roses, vines, even a folded archway under which sat the soup bowls. The room buzzes with admiration. But you spot a thin-lipped French diplomat at the far end, arms crossed, eyeing the folds with skepticism. These Italians, he mutters to a companion, fold as if they are writing love poems, not serving soup. He's not wrong. Italian folds often carried flirtatious subtext. Napkins in the shape of hands reaching toward each other. Folds with hidden hearts. Designs meant to accidentally unfold in the guest's lap, leading to playful apologies and even more playful glances. The French found this scandalous. Which, of course, only made it more popular. Back in Versailles, the French response was swift, a surge of new designs, some copied outright, others invented purely to dazzle. Enter that imperial cone, a towering spiral fold meant to show superiority. Then came the chateau fold, meant to resemble a miniature fortress. Some were up to 10 inches high, supported by internal rings and starch so strong you could knock on them. It became something of a folding arms race. And, believe it or not, there were spies. Not the dagger-in-the-boot kind, but servants and apprentices who attended rival banquets, sketched folds from memory, then returned home to recreate them. In one famous case, a young footman named Paolo was dismissed from the French court after being caught sending diagrams of new Versailles folds to his cousin in Milan. The scandal? Mild but the shame? Immense. Paolo was dubbed Le Traiteur de la Serviette, the napkin traitor. Historians still argue whether these incidents were common or exaggerated by court gossip, but you can't help imagining a world where secret linen shapes were guarded like state documents. Folding techniques diverged, too. In Italy, they began experimenting with color, dyed napkins in shades of deep plum, gold, or terracotta. The French found this gauche. Linen must whisper, sniffed one mètre plié. Not shout. But then, a year later, guess what arrived in Versailles? Slightly tinted napkins. Pale blue only, of course. Just enough to complement the porcelain. You chuckle to yourself. It's the same story you've seen 1,000 times. Art breeds pride. Pride breeds rivalry. And rivalry breeds more napkin folds. Eventually, the two traditions began to influence each other. Italian fold softened some French rigidity, French precision sharpened Italian drama. In the middle of this polite war, a new hybrid style emerged, called the continental fold, popular in Avignon and Savoy. This style mixed the tall elegance of the French cone with the softer curves of the Venetian tulip. It was a diplomatic compromise, in napkin form. But the rivalry never really ended. Even now, centuries later, you can find etiquette books from the 1800s that refer to certain styles as à la française or à l'Italien. The marks remained. And here's the best part, while the nobility bickered about folds, the folders themselves were trading techniques, teaching each other, and sometimes even falling in love. One such tale survives in the diaries of a Genoese maid named Chiara. She writes of her secret folding lessons with a young French apprentice named Jacques. They'd meet in linen closets during diplomatic feasts, showing each other how to create spiral curls and four-corner fans. Eventually, they folded a pair of napkins shaped like clasped hands and placed them, quietly, on the tables of their respective lords. A silent truce. A wink across empires. So tonight, as you fold yourself deeper into this sleepy history, you rest knowing that even among kings and duchesses, politics and pomp, a little square of linen could still say something as simple as, "I see you. I admire your work. Let's fold something beautiful, together." You're back at Versailles now, tucked once again into the grand dining chamber, where candlelight flickers off crystal, silverware glints like small swords, and a soft clatter of chairs signals the arrival of yet another royal meal. The musicians tune their strings. The air smells of lemon peels, roasted veal, and linen. Everything is perfect. And then it happens. Disaster at dinner. It starts innocently enough, with a beautifully folded napkin shaped like a swan. A marvel of symmetry. Wings tucked, beak up, tail elegantly curled. It sits proudly in front of the Duc d'Aubignac, who leans forward, admiring it. Then he laughs. "Charming," he says, pointing. He looks ready to swim away. He reaches for his wine. And that's when it topples. The wing folds, softened slightly by the kitchen's warm humidity, begin to sag. The beak dips forward. The base slips sideways. And with the slow, tragic elegance of a sandcastle melting into the tide, the swan folds in on itself, drooping, slouching, and landing face first into the duck soup. The splash is modest. The reaction is not. The room goes silent. The duck freezes, a rivulet of broth running down his waistcoat. He blinks at the drowned swan, now little more than a damp linen pancake. Someone coughs. A nearby lady gasps. You hear the sound of one horrified servant dropping a fork in the hallway. The maître plieur, let's call him Bertrand, feels it in his bones. From across the room, he knows. His swan has died. He rushes to the folding chamber. Replays every step. Was the starch too light? Was the air too damp? Did someone handle the tray wrong during service? Historians still argue whether this specific event was as dramatic as letters later claimed, but multiple sources mention an unfortunate folding collapse during a royal banquet in 1681, so, let's just say, where there's smoke, there's probably soup. Folding disasters, while rare, were feared. Not just for the embarrassment, but for what they implied. A collapsing napkin? A bad omen. An insult. A symbol of instability. One duchess famously refused to eat her meal after her napkin, meant to be a peacock, resembled a plucked pigeon and arrived partially unfolded. She claimed it was an attack on her virtue. She left in tears. Folding errors even had names. A drooping top fold? A weeper? A sagging base? A cow's foot? A complete structural collapse? A jester's fall? Some folds were so complex, they had failure categories mapped out in advance. The famed Crown of Brittany design, for example, had 3 potential fold points, all of which could lead to the crown turning into what one folder ruefully called the limp beret. But while disasters were dreaded, they also created legends. One maître, Madeleine, folded a napkin castle so complex it needed a wooden scaffold beneath. Mid-banquet, a wayward elbow bumped the table, the castle swayed, and didn't fall. The guests applauded. She became known as Madame Fortress. Her protégés stitched tiny crowns into their aprons in her honor. Still, not everyone survived the shame. There's the story of Clement, a young folder who tried to replicate a newly fashionable Italian fold, a spiral dolphin leaping through a napkin ring. It flopped. Literally. The tail sagged, the body drooped sideways, and the resulting shape looked more like a dead eel than a playful dolphin. The duchess it was meant for refused to touch it. Clement was reassigned to polishing candlesticks for a year. He never folded again. Of course, not every disaster came from bad technique. Sometimes, external forces interfered. A gust of wind from an open window once sent an entire line of table-folded fans tumbling across a courtyard. A guest's ill-timed sneeze reduced a delicate butterfly fold to soggy wads. At one infamous wedding feast, a pet monkey, yes, a monkey, escaped from a nobleman's shoulder and ran down the table, ripping each napkin to shreds in triumph. The bride cried. The monkey was uninvited. But through it all, the folding continued. Because that's the thing about art made from fabric, it's fragile. Temporary. Vulnerable. And sometimes, the disaster becomes part of the memory. Years later, guests would still joke, remember the drowning swan, or is this peacock folded or molting? In a way, these moments made the folds human. Even the king, it said, had a sense of humor about it. After one particularly floppy imperial rose failed to stand upright, Louis XIV reportedly chuckled and said, "Ah well. Let the wine stand tall if the rose will not." Whether he really said it or not doesn't matter. It became a saying in kitchens for years. You wander now among the aftermath of a banquet. Folded ruins lie abandoned, some still proud, others slumped like tired dancers. A swan with a bent neck. A flower missing its center. A fan that has folded itself into a sleepy shell. The servants sweep quietly. The folders gather their tools. There is no blame. Only linen. And another banquet tomorrow. And in a strange way, you feel comforted. Because even the most beautiful creations sometimes fall apart. And that doesn't make them less lovely. Or less worth folding. It just makes them real. After the chaos of the swan collapse, you'd think napkin folding might retreat into safer, more subdued shapes. Fans. Rolls. Maybe a sturdy cone or two. But instead, it got juicier. Because what do humans always do when given a delicate object and too much time? We make it dramatic. We hide secrets in it. We fold feelings into corners, tuck gossip into pleats, and let forbidden thoughts bloom quietly in centerpieces. Tonight, you drift through the quieter corners of Versailles, the corridors behind the dining halls, the small parlors where servants rest, and the linen closets where, it turns out, scandals, love notes, and linen meet in a clandestine triangle. It begins with folded notes, literal ones, pressed between napkin layers like jam in a crepe. A servant delivering a napkin to a lady might leave a slip of parchment inside, a flirtation, a joke, a favor owed. Some noble women discovered such notes with mild amusement, others with real interest. A few even wrote back. You find the story of Lucienne, a chambermaid who exchanged napkin messages with a footman from Burgundy for over a year. Their correspondence was entirely within napkins. He'd fold a fan and write under the last pleat. She'd reply inside a rosebud fold, careful to pinch the cloth just loosely enough for him to retrieve it without unraveling the whole piece. It was slow. Patient. Romantic. A sort of linen courtship. And when he finally asked her to meet him, hidden in the fold of a double scroll, it was said she burst into tears beside the starch basin. Of course, not every message was lovely. Folded napkins were also used to deliver warnings, insults, or accusations. One maître plieur, angry at being underpaid for months, began crafting intentionally provocative folds. A goose with its head tucked under? Coward. A spiral shell that opened inward? Greedy. No one could prove it, but after 3 of these were served to the same visiting count, he stopped dining at Versailles altogether. Historians still debate whether these symbolic insults were widely understood or just appreciated by insiders. Either way, the threat of subtext added delicious tension to each table setting. And then there were the folded proposals. Imagine this, you're seated at a smaller, more intimate feast. Maybe it's a birthday dinner. You glance at your napkin and, wait. This isn't the usual fold. It's a pair of joined hands, made of 2 intertwined cloths. You unfold it and there, between the fingers, is a note, "Would you walk with me in the garden, after the fruit course?" Not exactly poetry, but in 17th century France. That's basically a marriage proposal. Not every invitation was so tender. There's a tale, perhaps apocryphal, but you want to believe it, of a particularly daring duchess who once had her napkin folded into a closed tulip, and when she opened it, found a key inside. She rose from the table, said nothing, and exited through the west corridor. She didn't return for the cheese course. And then, there's Jack, the folder with a reputation. He folded with flair. He folded with drama. And he folded for the marquise. No one knew how their affair began, but every time she dined at court, her napkin fold was unique. A climbing vine. A secret gate. A heart pierced by a stylized fork. She'd unfold it slowly, eyes never leaving Jack, who stood by the wall pretending not to exist. One day, her napkin was simply flat. No fold at all. Just a square. She left that night and didn't return to court for 3 months. When she came back, her napkin was a phoenix. And she smiled. These stories abound in dusty kitchen logs, scribbled servant memoirs, and oral tradition passed down to linen maids in quieter centuries. They are part rumor, part truth, part dream. But they point to a deeper fact: napkins weren't just folded. They were infused with sentiment, with mischief, with messages that couldn't be spoken aloud. And it wasn't limited to love. Sometimes, folds were used for warnings. Before a particular scandalous trial, one nobleman found his napkin shaped like a noose, an elaborate twisted cord of linen tied in a loop. He laughed it off, but historians now believe the fold may have been a subtle message from someone in the court: watch your step. There were napkins folded like closed books, implying secrets kept. Napkins shaped like walls, meaning someone was being shut out. Even mirrors, circular folds with a slit in the center, meant reflection, self-awareness, or perhaps surveillance. It was a code of feeling, not fact. The folding masters, though rarely acknowledged by their noble guests, knew exactly what they were doing. They crafted symbols from starch and thread, watched reactions from shadows, and passed messages in plain sight. And this delicate emotional espionage continued for decades. You picture Etienne again, older now, wiser, folding a simple napkin into a forget-me-not flower. He slides it onto a widow's plate, gently. She sees it, blinks, says nothing. But after the meal, she leaves behind her handkerchief folded in the shape of a teardrop. A silent conversation. Folded. Unfolded. Remembered. Now the dining hall is empty again. Candles flicker lower. You walk between the chairs, spotting forgotten linens, some still shaped, some unfolded, revealing tiny impressions where messages once hid. They look like footprints in snow. Fleeting, but real. And as you move quietly through the echoing space, you wonder, if someone folded a napkin for you tonight, what would it say? You wake gently in the folds of the story, figuratively, of course, and find yourself seated at a long wooden table in a quiet library, far from the glittering chandeliers of Versailles. The candles here are humbler. The air smells of dust and pressed linen, and before you lies a stack of books, their spines cracked, their covers embroidered, and their contents astonishing. You're flipping through napkin manuals and folding schools, real ones. Some printed, others handwritten. All of them dedicated to the once vital art of napkin folding. Yes, such things existed. Once the art of folding caught the aristocratic eye, the demand for standardization followed. Metropliers began recording their designs, not just to preserve them but to teach others. And so emerged the first levers plies, folding books. You pick up one bound in faded red leather, dated 1675. The title, L'ordre et l'art de serviette, the order and art of the napkin. The first page is a woodcut illustration of a young man kneeling reverently before a folded lion. Okay. A bit dramatic. But you turn the page. Inside are dozens of full illustrations, folded boats, crowns, suns, and birds. Each accompanied by an almost mystical level of instruction. Fold with breath held. Twist once for loyalty. Pinch 3 times to remember. Historians still argue whether these poetic instructions were meant to guide motion or emotion. Were the gestures symbolic? Was the breath holding literal? Or was it simply a reminder to fold with reverence? Next to the books, you find practice linens, soft squares of cheaper cotton, used for repetition. Some folding schools required students to master 20 designs before graduating. Others demanded silent folding sessions, where mistakes had to be corrected without speaking. One master famously rang a bell every time a fold failed, which led to students developing phantom ringing syndrome, a historical name I may have just made up, but honestly, doesn't it sound accurate? You pass by a classroom sketch from a 1690s academy in Marseille. Rows of students at long tables, each folding while a tutor paces behind them. A chalkboard on the wall shows simple diagrams: triangle, twist, cross, tuck. No one smiles. Folding was serious. Napkin folding became part of a formal servant's education, especially for those serving in noble households. Some schools even categorized students by specialty: the fan folders, the animal sculptors, the structure builders. The most prestigious discipline? Floral folds. The peony, the hydrangea, the eternal headache of the four-petal poppy. The books often had elaborate names for their folds. You flip through a few with delight. The Peacock of Peace. The Embrace of St. Remy. The Winking King. The Buttercup of Silence. Some of them sound more like secret societies than table decorations. And while many of these books were printed for internal household use, a few were produced for public sale. As napkin folding spread to the bourgeoisie, remember Madame Brisson and her pyramid attempts, a new market opened up: aspirational hosts who wanted to pretend they had a maître plieur of their own. You picture it, a merchant in Lyon buying a copy of L'Elegant Folds for the discerning table, then sweating through 6 attempts at the Serpent of the Pyrenees before giving up and folding the napkin into a neat little square. Some manuals even included seasonal guides. Fold this in winter. Use this for weddings. Never fold a lion during Lent. Why? No idea. But someone thought it mattered. You pause on one diagram labeled the rising moon. It looks deceptively simple, but the notes beneath warn: should never be placed near soup. Vulnerable to steam. Of course. Even beyond books, entire schools of folding emerged. In cities like Bordeaux, Nice, and even Brussels, formal academies taught table service, which included folding. A year-long apprenticeship might culminate in a public folding exam. Yes, you read that correctly, a public folding exam. Guests would be invited. Linens provided. Each student had to produce 5 designs from memory, plus 1 original interpretation. Points awarded for symmetry, innovation, and emotional subtlety. The highest scorers? Often poached by noble families looking for new table talent. And there were competitions. The most famous? The Salon du Pli, hosted annually in Paris for over a decade. Maîtres from across Europe would display their finest folds. Judges, usually former royal staff, would award ribbons, sometimes even coin purses, to the most inventive. One winner, a man named Leo from Orleans, created a folded chessboard complete with opposing armies, white and ivory linen squares, knights, bishops, and all. It took 67 hours, required 3 apprentices, and had to be displayed under glass so it wouldn't collapse from breath. Did anyone ever eat at that table? Of course not. It wasn't about dinner. It was about devotion. And here's something unexpectedly tender: many of these manuals included blessings. Small lines printed at the end of instructions, like, "May your folds hold true. May your linen not weep. Fold in peace. Unfold with joy." It's a reminder that behind all the starch and ceremony, there was something gentle in this art. A belief that care, patience, and intention mattered. You imagine yourself there now, seated at a student's desk in a folding academy, your hands trembling slightly, your napkin square laid flat. You take a breath. You fold, press, twist, and lift. It's not perfect. But it's yours. And in the dim light of the linen library, that feels like enough. You close the last of the napkin manuals with a gentle thud, as if the folds within might be disturbed by noise. The library settles into silence. But as you lean back in your seat, a soft draft carries the scent of something different: change. It's the 18th century now, and the world is shifting. And with it, so too begins the decline of a fine art. The first cracks don't come from rebellion or outrage. They come from laundry. Yes, laundry. With the rise of industrial laundering, linen start to leave the household for central facilities, massive steam-powered washing houses that clean in bulk and return fabrics flattened, damp, and creased in all the wrong places. Suddenly, folding becomes less about artistry and more about efficiency. Maître plieurs grumble. They ruin the texture, one writes. They deliver folds already set, and set incorrectly. A few brave souls try to teach the laundresses to iron for folding, but the industry moves too quickly. Precision becomes casualty. Napkins now arrive ready to wipe, not ready to perform. Meanwhile, the culture of dining itself begins to change. Once opulent, 3-hour banquets begin to lose their luster among the new middle class, who are rising in both numbers and impatience. Meals get shorter. Tables get simpler. Candlelight gives way to gas lamps. And starch linen animals? Too much fuss. Too much ironing. Too much time. Historians note that around 1780, references to napkin folding in household guides start to dwindle. One popular Parisian etiquette book includes a chapter called Proper Use of Utensils, but dedicates exactly 3 sentences to napkins, and none to their shape. Instead, the focus turns to cleanliness, not craft. Napkins must be folded small, tidy, uniform, stacked neatly or placed beneath silverware. The idea of a folded dolphin at a family meal is now considered, well, a bit silly. And then it happens. The invention of paper napkins. Not overnight, of course. But the idea of disposable napkins, easy to use, easier to toss, gains traction across Europe by the early 19th century. At first, they're for travel. Then, for taverns. Eventually, they enter homes. To the old-school folders, it's unthinkable. You can't fold paper the same way. It tears. It crinkles. It lacks the pliable memory of cloth. A fan? Maybe. A tulip? If you're feeling reckless. But a castle or a hydra? Forget it. Still, paper spreads. And the culture shifts again. In the new industrial cities, napkin folding becomes a curiosity, not a skill. Something quaint. Something you might see in an old painting or a dusty inn that hasn't redecorated since Louis XVI lost his head. Some folders try to adapt. A few restaurants continue folding as performance. In Vienna, waiters at one famed café still place folded roses by each guest's plate. In Paris, a group of nostalgic plieurs forms a secret society, La Confrérie du Cygne, the Brotherhood of the Swan. Their mission? Keep the folds alive. But it's an uphill battle. By the mid-1800s, folding is nearly extinct. Only a handful of manuals are still in print, mostly reissued for novelty. One British edition from 1872 is titled The Dinner Table's Gentle Amusement, as if folding were now a game rather than a respected discipline. You sigh softly. It's hard watching a craft vanish, not in anger, but in apathy. But not all is lost. A few noble houses keep their traditions. In some parts of Provence, elderly maids still fold napkins into lilies for Easter. A rural inn near Dijon, run by a family of former palace staff, continues to fold fans for honored guests. You even find a diary entry from a governess in 1881 describing a birthday dinner where a child received a napkin folded into a rabbit. It wobbled terribly, she writes. But he laughed until milk came out his nose. Even now, the folds survive, in corners, in memories, in stubborn households that refuse to let cloth become only cloth. And in this moment, you pause. Because decline isn't the same as disappearance. Art doesn't always die. Sometimes, it rests. Sometimes, it waits. Pressed between pages. Stitched into linen. Dreaming in the soft drawer of a forgotten sideboard. The maîtres plieurs may have put down their irons. The salons may be closed. But every time a host folds a triangle and thinks, maybe I'll add a little twist, something stirs. A habit. A memory. A ghost. You look at the napkin beside you now. It's simple. A plain square. But with just one fold, one press, one little curl at the edge, you might turn it into something else. Something lovely. Something fleeting. Something folded. You step outside Versailles now, letting the golden walls fall behind as you follow the folds farther across the globe. Because while French courts may have elevated napkin folding to theatrical heights, they were far from the only ones playing with cloth. Tonight, you're traveling far and wide, following threads and textures across continents, discovering how napkins, and their equivalents, appeared in other cultures, each with its own quiet ceremony, each fold saying something different. First stop, Japan. Here, you find furoshiki, square pieces of cloth traditionally used for wrapping gifts, carrying goods, even folding lunch boxes. Not quite napkins, not quite packaging. But oh, the elegance. A soft knot at the top, corners tucked with almost spiritual care. In the Edo period, furoshiki folds were judged not just on appearance but on their intention. A gift wrapped with symmetry showed respect. A cloth folded tightly meant protection. Loose folds? An insult, or worse, a suggestion that the gift was given begrudgingly. You watch as a shopkeeper wraps a small bento in dyed indigo cloth, folding the corners in a twist known as the otoko musubi, man's knot, said to convey strength and decisiveness. It's not the same as a napkin swan. But the spirit? Identical. Thoughtful cloth, folded with meaning. Now you drift westward. To Persia, where ancient royal banquets were laid out with luxurious care. Instead of napkins, they used square cloths called sofre, elaborately embroidered fabrics placed beneath meals, often folded or arranged in symbolic shapes. In wealthier households, sofres were folded into rosettes or intricate scallop fans, echoing the geometry of Persian tilework. According to one Safavid court memoir, the queen's personal server folded the sofre into a 9-pointed star to reflect her astrological sign. Historians still debate whether this was custom or coincidence, but the guests remembered it for years. And then there's the Aztecs. No linen here, but agave fiber cloths, known as I8, used for everything from drying hands to food presentation. These weren't folded for art, but still held ritual significance. During ceremonial meals, an I8 might be laid in a specific sequence, with corners aligned to the cardinal directions. Some accounts describe priests folding the cloth to encase sacred offerings, corn cakes, cacao, flowers. Each fold, a sacred gesture. Fold right to left, north to south, breath held as the final corner seals in the spirit. And the cloth wasn't discarded. It was returned to the earth or burned with prayer. In India, you find angavastram, a versatile length of cloth used over the shoulder or across the lap during meals, especially in temple offerings or religious events. Folding it wasn't ornamental, it was ritualized. Certain festivals required it to be pleated precisely, with folds signifying purity, alignment, and order. One Tamil tradition involves folding the cloth into a square with a coin placed inside, offered to guests as a sign of abundance and blessing. Children were sometimes taught to fold the angavastram in specific patterns before family feasts, a gesture of gratitude for the meal to come. In the Ottoman Empire, napkin-like cloths known as peska were used in bathhouses and dining halls alike. The Sultan's meals were preceded by servants laying out peska in geometric patterns, often accompanied by small garnishes of rose petals or cloves. One 17th-century traveler's diary tells of a palace banquet where the peska was folded into a three-tiered dome resembling a mosque. Whether or not the author exaggerated, the symbolism is clear, a sacred space, even at the table. Then, the islands of the Pacific. In Polynesia, particularly in pre-colonial Hawaii, tapa cloths, made from bark and softened over time, were used to wrap food and ceremonial offerings. Folding wasn't decoration, but honor. Meals were wrapped and unwrapped like gifts. Some chiefs received folded tapa that represented land boundaries or kinship lines. And finally, back toward Europe again. In Russia, during Tsarist banquets, ornate cloths were placed at each seat, not folded for shape, but for symbolic placement. A square aligned to the northeast? A sign of favor. Rolled diagonally? Reserved for clergy. Some folklore even suggested that the direction in which a diner unfolded their cloth could reveal secrets about their intentions, friend, foe, or fool. All of this, the furoshiki, the sofre, the I8, the angavastram, isn't napkin folding the way Versailles knew it. But it shares the same heartbeat, cloth as communication. No matter where you land in the world, someone, somewhere, took a piece of fabric and turned it into something more. A message. A blessing. A boundary. A memory. You sit now, cross-legged beneath an imagined banyan tree, tracing with your fingers the ghost folds of all these traditions. Some symmetrical. Some wild. Some never written down. And you realize, folding isn't always about the shape. Sometimes, it's about the gesture. The moment of pause. The time taken. The quiet choice to take something soft and make it speak. So even if your napkin tonight is simple, white, and square, somewhere in the world, someone else has folded one too. For luck. For love. Or just for the joy of it. You return now to the present, all close enough. The marble floors of Versailles have faded behind you, the scent of roast duck replaced by something humbler. Familiar. A cafe in Montmartre. A family table in Seoul. A wedding hall in Kentucky with cloth napkins stiff from too much starch. Because despite centuries of decline, despite steam laundries and mass-produced serviettes, the napkin fold has never quite died. In this chapter, you meet the oddballs. The eccentrics. The romantics who refuse to let folded cloth disappear forever. These are the revivalists, people bringing napkin folding back, one fan, rabbit, or duck at a time. You begin with Madame Agnes, a retired schoolteacher from Toulouse, who spent her post-retirement years researching old French folding guides. She didn't find them in libraries, she found them in flea markets. In dusty trunks. In letters stuffed between recipe books. She now teaches napkin folding workshops in her village's community center. Every Thursday evening, 6 to 8 attendees gather around a folding table. Tonight's lesson, the three-fold swan. Someone brings rosé. Someone brings too much starch. It's not Versailles, but it's sincere. At the end, everyone takes home their swan wrapped in foil, like a linen souvenir. Then there's Dieter, a German engineer who discovered a love for napkin geometry during a particularly boring physics conference. He now runs a YouTube channel, Napkin Precision, with 78,000 subscribers. He folds with tweezers. Measures angles. Names his designs things like helix of grace and platonic cone. His most watched video is a 37-minute tutorial on the double ox fold. The comment section is disturbingly wholesome. In Tokyo, a boutique hotel offers guests custom folded napkins upon check-in. You can request a fan, a fox, or a Mount Fuji. One couple asked for their towels to be folded into cranes for their anniversary. The clerk obliged, and added a tiny linen sun between them. Historians, too, have entered the scene. At the University of Edinburgh, a textile scholar named Clara devoted her doctoral thesis to the semiotics of napkin folding in early modern France. Her research included hours reconstructing lost designs using nothing but woodcut diagrams and ironed handkerchiefs. Her favorite? The twinned grapevine. Her colleagues rolled their eyes. She didn't care. And the internet? Oh, it helped. Search napkin fold wedding and you'll enter a world of peacocks, bows, and intricate lotus blossoms. Folded roses stuffed with menus. Fans tucked into chargers. Some gaudy, some elegant, all made with intention. People care. You care. Even restaurants have joined the fold, so to speak. There's a small inn in the Cotswolds where each evening's napkin fold hints at the day's weather. An umbrella for rain. A fan for heat. A snowflake for frost. Guests don't always notice. But the staff smile when they do. One elderly maître d' in New Orleans claims to have invented the crawfish crown. It looks more like a confused lobster. Doesn't matter. His regulars ask for it every Friday. You smile. Because the fold is back. Not loudly. Not universally. But in pockets. In passion projects. In small acts of table poetry. It's no longer a court ritual or a sign of political intrigue. Today, a folded napkin is a gesture. An offering of care. A whisper that says, I wanted this moment to feel special, even just for a second. Even fast food chains have taken note. A cafe in Seoul wraps its burgers in paper folded like lotus petals. A bakery in Amsterdam serves pastries on doilies folded into tiny chairs. And yes, some people go overboard. You find an online tutorial for a Game of Thrones napkin dragon. It requires 7 cloths and a glue gun. The creator insists it's dishwasher safe. You are not convinced. But that's part of the charm. Napkin folding today isn't about mastery. It's about meaning. The beauty of doing something unnecessary, just because. You picture a father folding a bunny for his daughter's birthday. A teenager making a heart for their first date. A retiree folding cranes because it reminds them of a spouse now gone. And suddenly, folding feels timeless again. It doesn't need a palace. Just hands. A moment. A square of softness and a little imagination. Back in Toulouse, Madame Agnes teaches her final class of the season. Tonight's theme, the memory fold. Each student chooses a shape that means something to them. A dog, a bridge, a flame. At the end, she tells them the old blessing. Fold in peace. Unfold with joy. The students nod. Some press their napkins flat and carry them home. Others leave theirs on the table. One man smiles, then carefully folds his into a rose and places it on the window ledge as he leaves. You linger. You watch the rose catch the last light of day. And for just a moment, you remember every fold before it. You're back at Versailles one last time. But not in the grandeur of the banquet hall or the hum of the folding room. No. Tonight, you're in the stillness after. It's late, past midnight. The fire in the hearth crackles low. Wax drips steadily from the last standing candle. The air carries the quiet warmth of a room just lived in, with faint traces of roast chestnuts, beeswax, and a little sweat from the folding apprentices who have long since gone to bed. A single napkin rests on a long walnut table, alone now, folded into something simple. Not a phoenix. Not a castle. Just a spiral. A curl inward, then inward again. That snail of rest, as it was sometimes called. A shape folded not for performance or politics, but for closure. You sit beside it, no longer a guest, no longer a servant, just a witness to the centuries of folded grace this small square has known. The kitchen boy Etienne, remember him? He's older now. Wrinkled hands. Hair turned to ash. He moves slowly, but with memory in his fingers. Tonight, he folds not for kings or diplomats or stubborn dukes who insulted the soufflé. Tonight, he folds for himself. One last napkin. The same shape he first learned at 14, just a simple fan. He creases it gently, the rhythm ingrained after 50 years of repetition. No starch. No iron. Just cloth and memory. It flutters slightly in the firelight. Then rests. The fold holds. He smiles. Not because it's perfect, it isn't. One edge is off. A corner curls where it shouldn't. But it's beautiful in the way all last things are. The world around him is changing. Napkin folding has long since lost its courtly height. There are revolutions rising outside these walls. Spoons rattle. Thrones wobble. But the fold remains. Because even in uncertain times, the act of taking something soft, something ordinary, and shaping it with care, matters. Outside the palace, the world rushes forward, trains and factories and electric lights. But here, in this quiet room, a fold is still a fold. The linen softens as the starch fades. The corners loosen. A crease relaxes, as if exhaling. You feel yourself relax, too. And so the story drifts to stillness. Not an ending. A quiet folding in. The napkin waits to be unfolded again. Perhaps by you. Word count, 1035. Wind down, approximate 300 words. Now, let your breath slow. Let your mind begin to soften like warm cloth just released from a careful fold. You're no longer in the banquet halls, no longer tracing the edges of embroidered linen or following the quiet pride of apprentices with steady hands. You're just here, wrapped gently in the hush of memory and fabric. The world outside fades, and in its place, the flicker of candlelight on silver platters, the whisper of starch being brushed on smooth cotton, the rustle of cloth being turned and turned again. Slow. Deliberate. Like waves lapping against the shore of an old, forgotten kitchen. You can still smell the faint trace of lavender from a drawer filled with linen. You can still hear the soft thump of folded cloth placed gently on a plate. You can still feel the rhythm of hands folding not just napkins, but time. So wherever you are tonight, bed, sofa, tucked beneath a favorite blanket, know this: the world is full of quiet craft still carried forward. Of small acts of care. Of folds, both grand and simple. And when you close your eyes, imagine your thoughts folding gently into one another. Like linen curling into a spiral. Loose. Soft. Weightless. You've reached the end of the story now. Let it rest beside you. Unfold with joy. Sleep well.